Hello and welcome to Lecture 18 of Ancient and Medieval Worlds, this time on the rise of Christianity. The success of Christianity, going from a persecuted minority to the official religion of the Roman Empire, is a story that seems nearly miraculous and has excited debate ever since. As we shall see today and in later lectures, Christianity and Roman culture are intimately intertwined with one another because of this story, a legacy that survives today in this the Roman Catholic Church and other churches, institutions that trace their origins back to the Roman Empire and were responsible for preserving a great deal of Roman culture, although not necessarily in its original form. There are two parts to this lecture. In this first part, we're going to talk about how early Christianity formed from as an offshoot initially of Judaism, and the early Christian churches during these centuries of their prosecution by the Roman Empire is the rest of this first part. In the second part, I'm going to talk about the conversion of Constantine to Christianity and the profound changes that meant for both the Roman Empire and the Christian church. Christianity was an outgrowth of Judaism in the 1st century CE that we talked about in our last lecture, but it appeared in this time of intense change for the Jews and quickly developed into a new religion that had little resemblance to its originator. Most scholars would agree that there was, in fact, a historical Jesus, but our sources about him are extremely biased. They're almost entirely Christian. Who do not always agree with each other about Jesus, and most were written decades or more after Jesus' death in approximately 30 CE. Nothing survives from Jesus' own lifetime about him. The first books of the New Testament, as Christians call their new scriptures, are the story of Jesus' life, called the Four Gospels. But these were only written over a generation later. The New Testament paints a believable picture about some of the basic outlines of Jesus' life in the context of the early 1st century CE, which is not to suggest that every detail fits with a secular interpretation. But this is when Judaism was learning to deal with Roman overlordship in the aftermath of Herod the Great's death. As we saw in our lecture on Judaism, many Jews were hostile to Roman authority for religious reasons. But many members of the Jewish elites wanted to appease Rome in order to avoid violence. Our sources tell us that there were numerous people in this time calling themselves Jewish prophets, that is, claiming to speak for God to the Jewish people. That was a long-standing religious approach within Judaism to political tension. Many Jews were skeptical about these so-called prophets, but others flocked to them. This appears to be the way Jesus was initially interpreted. But there were also ancient Jewish prophecies about a Messiah, as we saw, that is, an anointed one, a term taken from the ceremony that crowned a person king of Israel or Judah, pouring oil over their head. Many Jews hoped that the Messiah would appear to lead them as a new king against the Romans. Of course, by this point, many of these Jews spoke Greek, so instead of the Hebrew term Messiah, they used the Greek word for an anointed person, Christ. It is perfectly believable that a Jew like Jesus, hoping to solve some of his society's numerous problems, would have been hailed as the Messiah or Christ by some Jews, and that in response the Jewish establishment would have worked with Roman authorities to prevent this troublemaker, as they could very easily have seen him, from causing a Jewish revolt that would lead to a Roman reprisal. And as, of course, this is exactly what happened about a generation later and not connected with the Christian sect, with the Great Jewish Revolt and the destruction of the Second Temple, it turns out that the Jewish authorities had every right to be afraid that such an outcome would result of a popular preacher being hailed as a prophet. But we have no account from Jesus' own perspective, nor do scholars believe we have an account from anyone who knew Jesus directly, although several parts of the New Testament have been attributed to Jesus' immediate followers, the apostles. Apostles means messengers in Greek. Notably, none of the four Gospels actually claim to be written by the individuals whose names have been associated with them. The first surviving writings about Jesus, and the oldest part of the New Testament, are letters written by Paul, a Jew with Roman citizenship who converted to Christianity but never met Jesus himself. Paul founded numerous Christian communities across Anatolia and Greece. Paul was in part so successful because he argued that non-Jews could become Christian without having to observe the old laws of the Torah, what Christians now began to refer to as part of the Old Testament, as opposed to the Hebrew Bible, that is the term preferred by Jews. These would include such things as dietary restrictions and male circumcision that required a major lifestyle change. It appears from the various writings in the New Testament that Jesus' followers initially only intended to change Judaism from within rather than found a new religion entirely. There were already Gentiles who wanted to convert to Judaism in the Roman world, so the assumption seems to have been that non-Jewish followers of Jesus would have to do the same. Paul, however, argued for something radically different. He put forth new interpretations of the Hebrew Bible, that is, the Old Testament as it was coming to be called by Christians, as we've seen, which is quoted throughout the New Testament. That is, the Hebrew Bible is quoted throughout the New Testament. But here Paul argued that Christianity had superseded Judaism, that it was replacing Judaism. For instance, Paul read the story of Abraham, that legendary founder of Judaism that we looked at last time, in an allegorical light to be about Christianity. Paul said that Abraham's two sons by different mothers represented on the one hand enslavement to the law of Moses as he saw it, and on the other the spiritual freedom granted by Christ's death and resurrection. That would have been strange enough to most Jews, but Paul further said that the son Jews claimed to be descended from, Isaac, the second of the patriarchs, in this case represented Christianity, figuratively superseding the Jews in their own foundation story. The New Testament is filled with such allegorical interpretations of the Hebrew Bible to read it from a Christian perspective. Reading the stories the Jews took literally in some cases, but also figuratively in others in new ways. A description of Jewish history now became a metaphor about Jesus and Christianity. But it's also clear from Paul's own writings that he was arguing with other early Christians, and not just over whether Gentile converts had to circumcise or otherwise observe Jewish laws and customs. Christianity from our earliest records was divided over how it understood fundamental religious beliefs. The Romans, however, did not understand any of these distinctions between Christians and Jews, and as far as they were concerned, Christians were a weird sect of deviant Jews. Indeed, some early Christians were converted Jews from Judea and the diaspora and continued to observe some Jewish customs, although it seems that these were rapidly outnumbered by Gentile converts. As far as the Romans were concerned, Christians could either go back to being Jews or polytheists. New was bad for the Romans, especially in religion, and Christians therefore did not have the authority of tradition, as the Jews did. So Christian refusal to worship the polytheistic gods was not tolerated by the Romans. Because remember that in Roman religion, ritual, not belief, was what mattered. Appeasing the divine was a matter of making the right sacrifices in the right way, something which they could understand about Judaism. Ancient Judaism as it was still practiced before the destruction of the temple. And this ritual, as far as both Jews and ancient Jews and polytheists would have understood it, was a corporate matter, not merely private. One person ignoring the gods could bring down divine wrath on the entire community. Christians were therefore seen as a danger to the safety of the Roman Empire. A big shift in the position of Christianity came when official, deliberate persecution by the Roman government began in 64 CE under the Emperor Nero. Nero used the Christians as scapegoats for a massive fire that had burned down most of the city of Rome. Some people had actually blamed Nero himself for this fire, as he promptly built himself a new palace in the place that the fire had cleared of old houses, and we have impartial sources who thought that the Christians were innocent. But there is evidence, actually, that certain Christian sects obsessed with the end of the world thought that burning Rome might actually get the apocalypse going. It's a historical debate that we'll likely never be able to solve. It could just as easily have been an accident. Either way, Christians made easy targets. The Romans didn't trust them for several reasons. First, Christians, like Jews, refused to sacrifice to the polytheistic gods. But unlike Jews, they couldn't argue that the antiquity of their customs proved that this new system worked. Second, Christian worship revolved around the ceremony of the Eucharist, or communion, what later came to be called the Mass in some sects of Christianity. That was a reenactment of Jesus' Last Supper, where Christians symbolically referred to bread and wine as the body and blood of Jesus. This ceremony was always conducted in private in early Christianity and only amongst fellow Christians. And this secrecy led to rumors of cannibalism and conspiracy. You have to imagine it as through a game of telephone. If you'd only heard rumors about this, it would sound pretty bad. And the Romans never liked people who met together in secret. Third, Jesus had been executed as a common criminal, worse than a common criminal, a rebel, and the method of his execution, crucifixion, was considered so humiliating that Roman citizens were actually exempt from it. Why would a god allow himself to be brutalized like that? It didn't make sense from a traditional Roman religious perspective, and it was seen as somewhat blasphemous to even suggest such a thing. Remember, Roman polytheism had no problem with the idea of men becoming gods. The emperors were thought to do so. Hercules had done so. Numerous figures in Roman polytheism had originally been men and became gods. These figures were always warriors, kings, or emperors. They were not rebels, or, as the Romans would have thought of Jesus, criminals. Well, these organized persecutions against Christians begun by Nero were themselves to some degree new. Rome had never outlawed an entire religion before. Maybe certain adherents, but as we saw with the Jews during the Great Jewish Revolt, they generally only attacked people who resisted Roman rule directly, not the whole religion they might be associated with. If Romans had trouble understanding Judaism, at least they respected the idea of violent resistance, even if they then ruthlessly crushed it. But Christians willingly submitted to execution as martyrs, literally meaning witnesses, in imitation of Jesus' execution, which, again, made no sense to the Romans. We do have accounts of Christian martyrdoms from polytheistic sources, and while they had a certain amount of pity for such martyrs, polytheists by and large did not respect or admire them. These martyrdoms, however, were absolutely essential to Christian identity. Christians who were martyred were treated as heroes of the faith by their fellow believers. Many of the earliest Christian figures, including Paul, died as martyrs. Christian persecutions were irregular during the era of the Principate. We have correspondence between an emperor and a Roman governor about what to do with accusations that some people were Christians. And the rule that they worked out was to not encourage a witch hunt, but to make a simple test for people. If the people offered sacrifices to the polytheistic gods, then let them go. If not, execute them. And that made sense from a Roman perspective. The sacrifices were all that mattered. If you wanted to call yourself a Christian, that was fine, as long as you offered sacrifices. And the Roman bureaucracy wasn't really equipped to go on a witch hunt for Christians and didn't want to encourage the kind of social disruptions that it might bring, at least when times were good. But as we saw 2 lectures ago during the 3rd century crisis, emperors became more religious during that fiasco in the hopes that the gods would restore order. And the persecution of Christians increased dramatically during the 3rd century crisis as they were seen as a potential cause of the crisis. These persecutions and martyrdoms actually continued to increase under the Tetrarchy, particularly under Diocletian and one of the other Caesars. Christianity endured because it got organized. While Christians generally had to meet in private homes, as an illegal faith could hardly build public churches, they did develop a hierarchy and an organization. These were the Christian bishops, who are mentioned in some of the latest books of the New Testament. Each city would have a chief priest called a bishop, who claimed a connection through his predecessor bishops to the foundation of the church by Jesus' disciples, the apostles. This was not a familial connection, but passed down as a new bishop was chosen. The idea was that you were somehow spiritually descended from the apostle who had founded your city. After about 100 CE, bishops increasingly came to dominate early Christian communities. They still disagreed with each other about many points of doctrine, but they established 2 important precedents. First, that the bishops collectively should be in charge, and should create a hierarchy where certain bishops in the most important cities had preeminence. So, for instance, 2 of the most important cities of the Roman Empire, Rome and Alexandria, had 2 of the most important bishops. Second, the bishops slowly defined which texts would become Christian scripture, that is, which would become part of their New Testament. They also, very importantly, decided to keep the Hebrew Bible. Well, this gives us a basic understanding of the origins of Christianity in the 1st and 2nd centuries or so of Roman history, with a little teaser of the 3rd century. In the next part of this lecture, we're going to look at the phenomenally rapid transition of Christianity from a persecuted religion to the official religion of the Roman emperors.